guess he called them effing N-words. So understandably, people were pissed, though not entirely surprised. Because ironically, pieces of shit that say stuff like this are precisely why players kneeled to begin with. But then, what happened after is that the state's largest newspaper, the Oklahoman, they quickly identified one of the two announcers, Scott Sepulpa, as the culprit. But then, the other announcer, Matt Rowan, admitted he was actually the one who made the racist remarks, with him apologizing and not excusing what he said, claiming that he is not racist and he blamed it on his high blood sugar, adding that his diabetes caused his blood sugar to spike. Because, when a diabetic eats too much candy, they automatically start spewing the N-word. But the key thing here was that they identified the wrong person. And so while the Oklahoman corrected its report within a few hours, it was already too late. It had already spread to other outlets, and Scott said that he received a barrage of threats, hate calls, and messages. And so in turn, he sued the Oklahoman for defamation and the intentional infliction of emotional distress. And we're talking about it today because a jury just awarded him $25 million. $5 million in actual damages and the other 20 in punitive damages. Right, and that's big because the jury concluded that the newspaper acted with actual malice. Though their owner denies the allegation and says that it plans to appeal the verdict, with a spokesperson saying there was no evidence presented to the jury that the Oklahoman acted with any awareness that what was reported was false or with any intention to harm the plaintiff in this case. But we're gonna have to wait to see what happens with the appeal and whether Scott is gonna get any of that money. And then let's talk about mushrooms. So not the kind you might put on a salad or a pizza, but rather the one that would let you touch fingers with God. Because this new study funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse found that in 2022, U.S. law enforcement agencies confiscated a whopping 1,860 pounds of magic mushrooms, which was actually a little less than the record high the year before, but still a 273% jump from 2017. And apparently, y'all in the South and the West are tripping some serious balls, because 84% of the weight seized during the period studied came from those two regions. Though, arguably, it could also be because people in the North and the East just know how to hide it better. Though, notably here, the researchers say, this dramatic trend, it's actually probably not due to the authorities going after psychedelics more aggressively. If anything, they're moving in the opposite direction. Several cities having designated mushrooms a low priority for law enforcement. And hell, back in 2020, Oregon voters approved a measure legalizing therapeutic use of mushrooms. That then followed 2 years later by a similar measure in Colorado. Though, of course, big thing, the drugstore remains illegal on the federal level. And so you have the study's authors concluding, hey, it's just the mushrooming demand that's responsible for this trend, which is also backed up by other data showing increased consumption, especially among younger people. With one recent survey finding that 8% of adults aged 19 to 30 used hallucinogens in the prior year, which was a meaningful jump from just 3% in 2012. And you have experts guessing that's a result of a few different factors. Things like there's decreasing stigma around psychedelics, right? More general chatter about them in the culture. And then, of course, the string of clinical studies showing promising results in treating disorders like depression, PTSD, and addiction to other drugs. All of which is incredibly exciting, but also it has some experts worried that people are rushing to self-medicate. And that can be potentially very dangerous, right? In the best worst case, maybe you just have a bad trip. The worst case, you trigger full-blown psychosis. I will say transparently, I am a big believer and supporter of them. And that's even though I haven't done them in I think over a year. Also in the past, I did supervised ketamine treatments with a medical professional, both of which helped me through a really hard time in my life. It allowed me to process things differently, view things from a different angle. And I was always really hesitant to try anything else. Told my therapist at the time, I feel like if I do those things, it's going to be like me using a crutch. And he told me something that's very helpful, and it's probably not that insightful. But he was like, crutches help people get better. So it was definitely the case before I ever tried them. After I did, it solidified my support of, at the very least, decriminalizing these drugs, and at the max, legalizing them, especially in a medical setting. And personally, I'm of the belief of we should educate people about the risks and adopt harm reduction strategies. But I'm also of that mindset because I remember growing up, all the fear mongering there was around marijuana. And then I first tried it and I was like, what else are they lying about? But hey, that's the situation, some of my opinion on it, and I'll pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts here? Let's keep it locked on maybe magic mushrooms for this story. Do you think they should remain illegal? They should be decriminalized? They should be recreationally legal? Legal only if it's in a medical therapeutic session? Let me know what you're thinking and why. And then, so it turns out that Super Bowl advertisers, they're afraid of one big thing this year, and it is you. Right? Specifically, they don't want to piss you off. They don't want to deal with the backlash. And with that, you have Variety putting out a piece saying that because of that, Super Bowl commercials this year are going to play it safe. With Tim Calkins, a professor of marketing at Northwestern University, telling them advertisers are very aware that things can go wrong at the Super Bowl. And they realize that any ad can manage to annoy people or cause backlash, and nobody wants to put their careers on the line with a certain piece of Super Bowl footage. There's a huge incentive to be cautious, especially because this year to get the privilege to show 30 seconds of an ad on the Super Bowl, that costs $7 million, especially with how big and fast culture war fires rage. And with this, people people pointing back to things like the right-wing Bud Light boycott that happened after the team up with Dylan Mulvaney. But that, of course, not for the Super Bowl, but just this small social media campaign, which I will say it's been very interesting to watch Bud Light since. Like, they've been trying to get their audience back that they lost, or they did a big deal with the UFC, and it also seems like there's a fight about anyone they end up working with. I mean, just this last week, you had people arguing and celebrating Shane Gillis's sponsorship with them, people claiming he's this thing or that thing, he's on this side, no, he's on that side. And so, with all this heightened attention as we go into Super Bowl weekend, it wasn't really a surprise to see Bud Light drop a commercial this morning. They just stick to easy humor, celebrity cameos. And according to NYU marketing professor Paul Hardart, that's going to be the theme of the night, saying given the current global uncertainties, including geopolitical conflicts and polarized political climate, it appears that advertisers are leaning toward feel-good advertisements that are more focused on fun, humor, and entertainment. Also, apparently there's going to be a shift away from tech and AI and crypto. And as far as celebrities, we've seen a whole range of teases involving people that you're seeing right now, which also, that by itself is a very interesting evolution, with experts telling the New York Times that now advertisers want to pay for a narrative, for several weeks worth of buzz instead of just one moment Sunday night. I mean, hell, you have celebrities advertising their ads like they're movies. I mean, you've got stars like Jenna Ortega doing multiple interviews about her Doritos spot. We're also seeing a lot more beauty and female-focused ads this year, with experts pointing to the explosion of female viewership this year, largely led by Taylor Swift. But with all that said, who knows? Maybe someone serves us a curveball, or is there a negative reaction because people think that it's maybe too boring and generic? And then, it is safe to say that this year is off to a wet start. Pretty much throughout the country, rain, snow, and just cold. And what sucks is how the weather can tend to dictate our lives. And while it's always nice to be able to not go out into bad weather if we don't have to, most of us have to. But hey, if you have a pair of Vessies, you don't have to let the weather dictate your life. So thank you, Vessi, for being a fantastic partner of the PDS and for making great looking shoes I can wear in any weather. Because Vessi isn't just about shoes, it's about embracing life's spontaneity. Or for example, I grabbed my Vessies for a hike the other day, and it was a wet, muddy hike, though it was before this historic craziness that just happened. And thanks to my storm burst, I got my workout in, my feet stayed dry, and they cleaned up with ease. And they look great and come in light and dark colorways, and I love how easily they transition from day to night. And again, it's one less thing on my plate to worry about. That is always a plus. And hey, when browsing Vessi's site, check out their waterproof gloves, overcast jackets, sling bag, and socks. Yo, it's a new year, so go get yourself a new pair of sneakers. Just go to vessi.com/DeFranco to get 15% off your first order. That's vessi.com/DeFranco. And then for our next story, we have a guest presenter, and that is Phil from 3 weeks ago. We need to talk about how with the narrative of plastic pollution, advanced recycling has all of a sudden become positioned as a savior. But is it true? Is it more complicated? Is it just PR? Let's talk about it and break it down. And a big reason I'm talking about this with you today is that last month, the world's nations came together to do something that they've actually never done before. They began negotiations on the first ever international treaty to contain plastic pollution. Because not news, we've talked about this before, the earth is virtually flooded right now with plastic waste that's awful for the environment. I mean, we are producing 400 million metric tons more of this stuff every year. And at this UN meeting in Kenya, delegates were split over how exactly to address this growing problem. You had some pushing to reduce plastic production altogether, others wanting to merely dispose of plastic better. And a big thing here is that since the 1990s, the plastics industry has backed that second proposal. Just recycle it.
The bottle may look empty, yet it's anything but trash. It's full of potential. And at DuPont, we're making sure that the potential isn't thrown away.
But a hugely important data point, less than 10% of all the world's plastics are actually recycled, with most just getting incinerated, thrown into landfills, or dumped into the environment. And then even that fraction that is recycled, eventually that's got to be thrown out too because the quality of the plastic degrades with each use. Right, so in the face of all these disappointing results, in these past few years, the plastics industry has turned to a different method called chemical recycling, where unlike with the classic process, right, mechanical recycling, they simply chop plastic up, they instead melt it down and reuse it. Right, they dissolve the plastic into molecular elements, at which point it can then be turned back into fresh, high-quality plastic. And the process can even break down the most difficult products, right? Things that, at least by mechanical means, are written off as non-recyclable. So boom, we got the silver bullet, let's do a little dance. Except, not so fast. Turns out what works great in theory doesn't work so well in practice, with reports saying that most chemical recycling plants kind of just stop halfway through the process, right? So they break down the plastic into the original stuff that it was made from, fossil fuels, but then instead of turning it back into plastic, they just burn it. And that reportedly either done on-site or after being shipped to cement kilns and waste processors across the United States. Right? So the thing that everybody is assuming is helping clean up the environment, it's actually pumping more oil and gas fumes into it. I mean, it's not only emitting greenhouse gases that heat up our planet, but also it's putting out a whole array of toxic chemicals that endanger our health. With an investigation by the Natural Resources Defense Council finding that a single chemical recycling facility in Oregon, it produces nearly 500,000 pounds of benzene, lead, cadmium, and other hazardous waste per year. And you have another report by Beyond Plastics and the International Pollutants Elimination Network citing more scientific literature, finding emissions of persistent cancer-causing compounds from the chemical recycling facilities or their their fuel products include dioxins, volatile organic compounds, and heavy metals. So unsurprisingly, chemical recycling's hardly put a dent into the giant fucking mountain of plastic polluting the earth, with the report also finding that for the 11 chemical recycling plants currently operating in the US, collectively, they have stated the ability to process less than 1.3% of the country's annual plastic waste. And that's their stated ability. Trust that as much as you trust a guy to tell you his actual height, because it's unclear whether they're actually operating at maximum capacity. For example, the Brightmart Energy facility in Ashley, Indiana, according to The Intercept, they're still operating in a test phase at 1/50th of its publicized capacity 4 years after breaking ground. And while you had that plant barely making it off the ground, Brightmark tried to build what would have been the nation's largest chemical recycling plant in Georgia in 2021, because he had Macon Bibb County saying, hey, we'll give you $500 million in